The controversial topic of government considering introducing a national minimum wage across the board has featured prominently in the media. Now, analysts say the large scale of low-skilled workforce and poor education could mean that any tampering with the minimum wage as it currently stands may lead to increased unemployment. Early on, we were joined in studio by Gerhard Papenfus, the Chief Executive of the National Employers Association of South Africa, and I began by asking him, why is there a need for the introduction of a minimum wage across the board?
I think that's because of political pressure within the alliance. COSATU is pushing very hard, and I mean they are throwing figures of 7,000 rand a month around. There's other figures that's 4,000, 4,500. We don't know, so it's difficult to discuss it when you don't know. But it's if the principle is well, your question is why is it done? Well, I think it's political, and I think the ruling party finds itself in the predicament where they need to be seen to be doing something for people that's struggling. The problem is if you do something and you do something wrong, it will worsen the situation.
But I'm sure for a layman it wouldn't make sense. If a domestic is currently earning 2,000 rand and she's now going to get a minimum wage of 7,000 rand, it doesn't make economic sense.
Well, absolutely. Well, absolutely. So you're just using one example, and I think government is realizing that you cannot have across the board a minimum wage, but that takes you back to where we already are, where you have sectoral determinations that governs that determine wages in particular sectors, and then you have bargaining councils where employers and employees negotiate on wages. So there are very few employees, if any, currently not governed already by a minimum wage, but those minimum wages are sectorally determined. But you go beyond that, and that's the pressure is to determine a national minimum wage, which people say is a living wage. But the problem is that if you go beyond market powers, that will lead to unemployment.
Now, you did indicate that COSATU is behind this, but what is government's perspective on this? Because they part and parcel as the ruling party of the tripartite alliance. Yeah,
well, I mean, the tripartite alliance is a strange form of government, but that's how it is. There are all kinds of animals within this creature, and I think when your Labour ministry in these kind of setups are inclined to listen to Labour. But I think that the ANC in itself is split on the issue, and I think they realise it, and I think that's their problem at this stage, because it's taking quite a long time, and we don't get clear indications where they're going, and I think that is because they realise if you want to satisfy the COSATUs in your alliance and the SACP, then you're going to create a bigger problem. And what is happening, the more you interfere with this kind of thing, the more the employment there is, the greater the divide between rich and poor. And people say, this thing is increasing. Well, it is because there's interference. The danger is that you tell an employer what to pay. What happens then, an employer that would have paid more is now to some extent bound by what he's supposed to pay, and he said, well, that's what government says I must pay, so that's what I will pay. That might even be an employer that would have paid more. The question is, what about the employer that would have paid less? Well, the question is, can the employer that would have paid less, will he pay more? Or will he say, okay, instead of you working 5 days for me, you will now work 3 days for me, or 2 days, but I will still pay the same. The problem is, once you interfere with this thing in the market, you create distortions. And people don't believe it, but it happens, that there's increased unemployment when you interfere.
So, increase in employment when you interfere, but that impact will lead to more joblessness.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, our social bill is already very high. I mean, 16 million people are paid some form of a social grant, unemployment or whatever. Now, that's not sustainable. So, and you can never replace a job, even if it's a low-paid job. No grant. It doesn't matter how you look at it. A grant cannot replace a job. Because the self-respect you lose. And there's no skills development through a grant, and you get dependent on that thing, and there are people already that has no confidence in ever getting a job. They feel helpless. That's dangerous. We must get these people into the market. That's the first prize. And within a growing economy, hard workers will always benefit. That's how the market assists us.
But Mr. Papenfus, the big elephant in the room is, of course, employment, and it's also economic emancipation.
Yeah.
Because that's what we're striving for. But what should be the spin-offs if there is a minimum wage across the board for all South Africans? Well, if any, for that matter.
Well, there are no spin-offs. We say a good worker does not need minimum wage protection. A poor worker, and it's hard to say that now, but a poor worker will get a short-term benefit, but will eventually lose his job. So nobody benefits. The only sustainable job is a job which is the result of a demand in the market and paid for by supply and demand. The customer, unless the customer pays for the job is not sustainable, and it's for everybody. Even if it's for the public service. Unless the taxpayer pays and wants to pay, if that money runs dry, people will lose their jobs. That is the market power. So we need to understand that the only sustainable job is a job that is the result of market demand. So I cannot actually see any positive spin-offs from a national minimum wage.
What is the solution?
Well, I think we need a different attitude. I think the world of work need to change. Now, that's not a quick solution. Employers need to, the attitude of employers towards employees need to change. To the extent that people say employers will abuse employees. Of course it happens. But that employers do not employ with a purpose to abuse. But of course it happens. But employers' attitude towards employees need to change. We need to improve it, and that's not only here, it's worldwide. We must look after our employees and play them the best we can. Employees' attitudes toward work need to change. We need to increase productivity. We need to increase the economic cake. Because a good worker, any employer that finds value in a good worker will pay him to keep him. Because if you don't do it, he'll go to somebody else and he'll work for your competition. That's how the free market works. You get a good product, you pay for it, and you keep it. If you don't like your product, you'll pay him less. Well, then he can go, and he must learn the lesson that I need to improve my skills and my attitude. Now, that's the market power. So we need a different attitude within the labor market from both the employer and employee side, and then we need to increase the economic cake.
So compensation relating to performance.
Absolutely.